I have not uploaded a video in 2 weeks, and that's because for the first 2 weeks of OP16, I have been doing nothing but playing Black Yellow Teach and other OP16 leaders in preparation for the events that I have coming up. Every day off of work, I went to an unofficial or official tournament, and so therefore I went to 3 since the release of the set last week. The first one was a 3v3 in which I had a very undeveloped list, but I went 4-1 nonetheless, only losing to the Japan #1 Yadan. You may remember him as a red-green smoker player. And although I did make top cut, I didn't bring home any prizing because of course it's just an unofficial tournament, so you can't really expect all too much. But yesterday and today I went to an official tournament, 1 local as well as 1 extra grand battle. In the local I went 4-0, fighting against someone who's apparently a Shadow vs. Evolved world finalist, and won a very nice prize card, as you can see from my SleeveChief branded deck card. Oh, I also put some stickers on there too. Check out SleeveChief in this link in description below, as well as the code KAI5 for 5% off at checkout for the best TCG supplies. I can double sleeve my entire deck as well as my Dome deck and have my leader in a plastic case and still have a bunch of space for things like prize cards, promo packs, extra sleeves, and of course, dice. But so within my beautiful deck box, I have a local prizing that's actually worth $200 now because it has Luffy on it and Pokeballs have ruined the game. And from my flagship prizing, ironically, despite it being a supposedly more high stakes tournament, I went 4-1 in this tournament, winning this Perona. This is how I felt, losing my 1000 counter in the first round against Red Blue Lucy. So regardless, I feel like I'm going insane because I've played over 450 games at this point of OP16 and over 350 games of Teach alone. And it's for that reason that although I do have a guide that I'm in the middle of writing, I wanted to tell you about my current deck list because I think it's very different from what people are playing online, and I don't want you to feel forced to copy what everyone else is doing because I've found a lot of success with the way that I chose to build the deck. This video will be talking about the cards within the deck as well as why they're in the deck at certain copies, but I'm going to have a separate video talking about the matchups more akin to my videos like the Red Blue Lucy or the Purple Enel video that I put out in OP15. So if you're interested in that, make sure to subscribe and wait for that video as well, because there's going to be a lot more effort into that. I also want to remind you that I am in the middle of writing a guide. I'm about 15,000 words in, just non-stop writing in my free time on my lunch break, for example, just because I enjoy writing it. But this video is going to be an infinitesimal fraction of all the things that I can say about Teach, because obviously if I say every small nuance like I do within my guides, you guys are going to click off the video. So this is going to be a quick, snappy, short deck profile explaining exactly how to play Teach at a fundamental level so that you can start to build upon that skill. And if you want to buy my guide when it comes out, I'll always be here. The guide will be there. Make sure to check it out when it does come out. This video is just going to be more of a ramble about how to play this deck because it's still very new for a lot of people. I mean, hell, it's not out in the West yet, but that'll change with simultaneous release. Still, with that all being said, let's get in to the Black Yellow Teach deck profile. First and foremost, here's my full deck list. And also, by the way, here's a picture of my entire deck lined up physically so that you can look at all the shiny cards that I bought with my very good financial responsibility. Teach is a deck that a lot of people are going to misconstrue as being very easy because from the opponent's side, a lot of times you're just playing on curve. And oh my god, Teach, every single time he has the 6 cost, he has the 8 cost, he has the 10 cost. This deck is low skill, it's basically Blue Nami. Wrong. I think that this deck is extremely difficult, but not in the same way that a deck like Purple Enel is. Purple Enel is very similar in a more micromanagey way where your turn-to-turn plays are very important, but Teach is very difficult in your planning. You need to play 3 turns ahead if you're going to actually play Teach to a high level, because all of this deck is about how you're setting up for later turns to minimize the amount of resources that you're giving up and maximize the amount of damage that you can output and therefore win the game through these value trades. Unless Teach triggers out a card like the 6 cost Shiru, your hand size is basically never going to be going up. So therefore, to actually win out games against matchups, especially more aggressive matchups like Black Yamato, you need to be playing this value game where every single time you're trying to figure out how to maximize the amount of pressure that you can apply while also minimizing the amount of damage that the opponent can apply to you. Still looking at my list, I'm sure that you have lots of questions, and I'm going to address these all within the video when we get to that point. But before that, let's first talk about the core of this deck list and what makes it so powerful so you get a fundamental understanding of how this deck list actually functions so that you can bring it straight into your locals, regionals, or even just the sim, for example. I made a deck building video recently, so I'm going to be using some terminology from that. The 10 cost Teach is going to be the anchor of this deck. Everything revolves around this 10 cost Teach in my opinion because it's so powerful, and having a leader that isn't Black Teach that's able to use it is stupendous. A 10 cost Teach is a 10 cost 12,000 power blocker, which negates the opponent's lead effect for the duration of that turn, as well as negating one of the opponent's characters from attacking until the end of the next turn. Back in OP09 with Mono Black Teach, there weren't all too many use cases for the first part of this effect, negating the opponent's leader effect, except for a matchup like Red Shanks. But in this meta, now that we have so many powerful leader effects in the game right now, this card is insanely powerful. Not only is Blue Yellow Nami not able to go to 7,000 power, Red Blue Ace is not able to use either part of his leader effect either. On top of this, the second part of the effect, negating one of the opponent's characters and denying it the ability to attack, means that you can turn off things like blocker, or of course you can just stop very large attacks from coming through. Essentially what this means is that because this character is a blocker, with this card alone, you're stopping 3 attacks. You stop one with the activate main, which is basically an on-play effect for this card. You stop another with the blocker, and you stop a third one with your leader effect, because you can use your leader effect trashing a card with trigger to redirect the attack into the 10 cost teach. And this basically turns any attack into a 1 card defend anything as long as that attack is less than 12,000 power. So for all these reasons, this card is so powerful in this deck that I think that instead of playing a pretty good game and closing out the game with the 10 cost each, for the vast majority of matchups, your goal is to stall out the game and use your leader effect as well as a lot of the very powerful cards with on KO effects within this deck to stall time. To add to this philosophy further, you can choose to try to take out the opponent's board and reduce the number of attacks that they have to 3 total. If they have 2 characters and their leader, that's 3. And if you negate 1, then you can basically stop any 2 of the other next attacks with that block as well as your leader effect, making it very difficult for the opponent to actually close out the game if you can manage to get it to this state, because your board is going to keep getting bigger while the opponent's board is probably going to keep getting smaller as you start to use these 10 cost teaches as attackers later on. Still, this 10 cost teach is absolutely insane, so that's why I built my entire deck around this card, although I have seen some decks not running this card and running things like the 9 cost Boa Hancock instead. This card alone is obviously not enough to end the game, because you do need to actually find a number of attacks to actually close out the game and not just stall time with 10 cost teach. And that's where the other higher end cards come in, the 6 cost Shiryu as well as the 8 cost teach. The 6 cost Shiryu is a 6 cost 8,000 where on play you trash 1 card and add a Blackbeard Pirate type character from your trash with a cost of 6 or less to your life, and it also has the trigger to draw 2 cards. And the 8 cost 10,000 power teach looks at the top 3 cards in your deck, adds 1 to your life, and has the trigger effect to negate one of the opponent's characters and then KO a character with a cost of 5 or less. Both of these cards have very, very good on-play effects while also having very strong triggers, which has understandably led to the conversation on the favoritism for yellow within the card game. But if you're playing yellow, we take those. The 6 cost Shiryu is a card that's comparable to the 6 cost Kuma in that they both trash 1 card to heal 1 life, but the difference is that the Shiryu, you have control over what that trigger is going to be, but it also gives the opponent knowledge of what that trigger is going to be as well. Therefore, you both have this information advantage, but you can choose a trigger that's going to help you the most. Now, you can put in triggers like things like the 1 cost Van Augur or things like the Vasco shot to immediately help you, but generally the best triggers to add to your life are going to be the 6 cost Shiryu to just draw 2 cards generically, or my personal favorite target to add to my life, the 4 cost Devon. A lot of the value of Devon is going to be in her trigger, so let's just jump to her first before we talk about the rest of these cards, because I think that this card is going to be most of the time used as a trigger, but it's going to be a very important trigger to remember. Katarina Devon is a 4 cost 2,000 power character, which on attack has the same effect as the purple Secret Rare Bond Clay, being able to copy on the opponent's character's current power, but she has an insane trigger where she draws 1 card and plays a 1 cost Blackbeard Pirate type character from your trash. This can be Van Augur, a card that on KO draws 1 card and gives on the opponent's characters or leader minus 3,000 power, effectively stopping 2 attacks if they're lower than 8,000 power. It can also be Vasco Shot, a character which on KO draws 1 card and then rests a 6 cost or less, again very good into lower bodies, especially things like the 6 cost NL. But in some very niche situations like against Red Blue Lucy, you can also put out things like Dakyu to deal with the opponent's 1 cost Rebecca, or the 1 cost Lafitte to just help you get through your searches and make sure that you have as much consistency as possible. There's lots of versatility in Devon, and importantly, because you're playing a character out of trash and drawing a card, this is a card neutral exchange, which is going to be really, really good, especially when you're going second and you're trying to play on curve, not playing out your 1 cost characters. Van Augur and Vasco Shot are going to be the premier targets for the Devon trigger, of course, as they have the ability to stop 2 attacks with 1 card if you use your leader effect to redirect the attack into that card. And so to have access to these cards when you need them to, I've run all of these cards at 4-ofs. Dakyu, on the other hand, is not necessarily very useful, though it can be occasionally useful into things like the mirror in some weird scenarios, Red Blue Lucy, or of course Purple NL, but most of the time it is just a 2,000 counter with trigger that's searchable, and that's just good enough for the most part. Lastly, Lafitte is a card which many people have not been running, but I think that consistency is one of the most important things to this deck. Yes, you have things like the 1 cost stage, but if you can't find that 1 cost stage, you're going to be in a very problematic spot. So therefore, I really enjoy putting in things like Lafitte, because not only is it a searcher, but it's an activate main searcher, meaning that it's going to be a pseudo block where if the opponent doesn't have smaller characters, it's going to absorb a 5,000 power hit, while also, of course, being able to be played off of this Devon trigger. Just in general, it's a great way to expand your resources in a deck that's technically not allowed to play for resources. Still, the 6-cost Shiryu, despite being a card that trashes a card on play, can gain more than that one card worth of value from the specific triggers that you can add to your life. So really all of this once again comes back to understanding what's going to happen later on in the game. Even if you're not going to use that trigger character quite yet, if you can set up for later on in the game with Devon into Vasco Shot, because you know you're going to use that Vasco Shot later on, to just help you get that last bit of defense to make sure that you can mount your comeback. And although we mentioned that the 6-cost Shiryu is similar to the 6-cost Kuma, except that you have public information that's shared between you and the opponent, the 8-cost Teach is not the same. The 8-cost Teach allows you to have control over what you're going to trigger by looking at the top 3 cards and choosing which cards you're going to add to your life. Though this does mean that you're not going to always have the perfect trigger available, it does mean that you're going to have an information advantage over the opponent. So even if you can't get that Shiryu or Devon, or in some even better cases like the 8-cost Teach trigger into your life, still this card's going to help you a lot, because not only is it 8-cost 10,000 power monster on the field, but also because you know what your trigger card is and the opponent doesn't, you play in the way that hurts the opponent the most, while the opponent can't really do anything about it, because if they attack with their characters first, then it could be Van Augur to reduce the opponent's leader's power. But if they attack with their leader first, then it can be something like Vasco Shot. So there's a lot of annoying mind games with the 8-cost Teach. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. And that's why this card is so powerful in my opinion. So we talked a little bit about consistency in the last section regarding Devon, so let's complete that now. The 1-cost Lafitte, of course, I think is an excellent card, just helping your deck go around, especially when you're handed first, which is usually going to be your worst curve, as you generally want to be going second, with the exception of some matchups like Purple NL. But of course, if you can't find your 1-cost stage, full OLED, or Hachinose as some people like to call it, then finding the piece that you need and not being fully bricked with counterless cards in your hand is going to come down to luck. So therefore, I think that people who are not running this card or running this card at 2 are completely mad. I think this is a staple 4 within the deck, especially when you're going second, because you have a powerful 6, 8, and 10 drop. Unless you already put down the stage on that 2-dong turn, you'll oftentimes forsake the 4-dong turn to play down a 4-cost to instead just go through your deck to try to find that stage. Because if you don't find that stage, though maybe you might be able to find your 6, 8, and 10 drop, after that, it's going to start getting scarier and scarier as you need to top deck your answers, because you can't have everything prepared when you just can't search, similar to the way that Red Shanks played back in OP09. So to have as much consistency as possible, I think this card is a 4 of, because although it is a -1 to your hand the turn that it's played, being able to search top 3 cards every single turn is crazy. So the difference between finding the stage and not finding the stage is very, very big. It's for that reason that if you see this stage in your starting hand, most of the time, unless your hand is absolutely abysmal, you should probably keep your hand. But even if your hand is abysmal, because this stage is going to be trashing a card and searching the top 3, then realistically, you can fix your hand in just a couple of turns. Really, the only reason why I wouldn't keep a hand with Hachinose in it is that if I want cards in my hand into the late game and don't want them in my trash, like for example, if I had a starting hand with 2 10-cost Teaches, the stage, as well as like 2 8-cost Teaches or something like that. That's an extreme example, but that is an example of something that I would mulligan despite having the stage, because those are cards that I want to hold into the late game and I do not want to see in the early game. So because the stage is trying to help you find your curve, if you just naturally draw your curve in your starting hand, if you see things like the 6-cost Shiryu, 8-cost Teach, and like a 4-drop, for example, then sure, I would keep my hand, because I have basically what I need and I have timings that I can find that stage later on, especially if I weave in things like the 8-cost event, zehahaha. But because I want to increase the consistency of finding this stage early on, I'm running 2 copies of My Era Begins to just make sure that I can find it, or at least have the highest odds of finding it in the early game when I still have the extra dong to search. So I do believe that this is one of the few flex spots within this deck. So if there are other cards or other tech cards that you want to add into the deck to deal with certain matchups, then I think that this is a fine choice to substitute. And I think that the transition from the searchers into the 8-cost event is going to make a lot of sense, and you'll see exactly why very soon. This card, unlike a lot of people who are running it at 2 ofs, I actually run as a 3 of. And the reason for that is because I find a lot of use cases for it in defensive scenarios. This card, like I Am Whitebeard, is an 8-cost event that can play out a 10-cost Martial D Teach from your hand, but you need to be at 10 dong, meaning that it's not pseudo ramp. And on top of that, the opponent is forced to take one of their life cards. So in a very weird way, this 8-cost zehahaha into the 10-cost Teach, because you get the negation on one of the opponent's characters, which could be a blocker, is very similar to Reject Amaru, a banned card within the One Piece card game. When this card was first shown, a lot of people were freaking out this would be the most insane card that was ever printed, auto 4 of in every single deck, and that wasn't necessarily the case, because Teach runs very low in hand size. Because the 8-cost event nor the 10-cost Teach don't draw any cards similar to the 10-cost Newgate, this card is actually just going to be a -2 to your hand to play out these characters, meaning that you're paying 2 cards to play out a 10-cost Teach on a turn that you could play 10-cost Teach anyways, to save 2 dong, but also have the opponent take one of their life cards. A lot of people will just snap use this every time off cooldown, but because it has trigger, a lot of times you want to hold on to it for your leader effect when you have other cards, or if you simply don't have other cards with trigger. And most importantly, because that card is added to the opponent's hand, that card can be used to defend the opponent's characters if you're trying to starve. So there is a weird bit of math that you can do on whether or not it's optimal or not to use this card. But the reason why I'm running this card at 3 copies is partly feeling, yes, but one of the other things is for those other games where you miss out on the 1-cost stage. When you're going second and you play your 6, 8, and 10 drop, then you don't have timings to play out your stage. And if you do take that time to put out your stage and forsake putting out the 10-cost siege, the opponent can get a lot of equity back within the matchup, and you lose what would be the most powerful turn in your deck, playing out that 10-cost siege for the first time. Still, sometimes this is necessary if you don't have the follow-up turn to the 10-cost siege. A lot of times people are just going to keep playing their most powerful cards and end up burning out because they don't have anything left to play after that. You need to set up for the future. Again, over and over, I'm going to mention Black Yellow Teach is all about setting up for the future. And so if you do manage to find your stage later on, but you don't have a timing to play it out, then using the stage as well as the 8-cost Zehahaha to play out the 10-cost siege anyways is the premier timing to put out the stage, or use any searchers that are stuck in your hand that you haven't been able to use, or things like a Lafitte that are on the board. And in this way, by searching on the same turns or like playing down the stage, you can use this in a more defensive and consistency oriented way because you managed to find spots to put down this very key card to your deck. Still, I shouldn't need to sell you on this card. I mean, it's Reject Amado. It's so powerful. And of course, though I do play this at 3 copies, I do also run 1 Black Vortex. Black Vortex is a 1-cost card which can add any card with trigger from your trash back to your hand. And most of the time, you can use this just as a simple 4th copy of your Zehahaha, but essentially it's just a 3rd, 4th, or 5th copy of any card with trigger within your deck. So in those situations where you really need to survive that one last turn, you can grab back your Vasco shot and play it onto the board while simultaneously using the 8-cost event, because that is going to be 1 dong for Black Vortex, 1 dong for Vasco shot, and then 1 dong for the 8-cost event. You can also use Black Vortex to pull something like the 8-cost Teach out of your trash to play it onto the board if you don't have some high-end target to play, whether it's on curve on that 9 dong turn or in this hyper late game scenario where you just don't have any other good top end. And worst comes to worst, you can just grab a 2000 counter back out of your trash as well. I think that Black Vortex is extremely versatile, but because it doesn't have all too many use cases throughout the game and it's generally just going to be a random one-time I'm feeling lucky card to pull back exactly the piece that you need, the final piece to your Exodia to win the game, I only run this card at a 1 of because it helps increase things like this to technically 4 copies and all of the other scenarios that I just mentioned. Still, I'm considering going to 2 Black Vortex and 2 8-cost event, but this is going to need a little bit more testing. I felt fine with this, but I can see it going either way. Regardless, I hope that you're starting to see the strings that pull this deck and make it function. It's not a deck that necessarily wins by its own merit, but by choking out the opponent's resources, very similar to a lot of decks that have existed in the past, like Black Emu or Black Crocodile, for example. Very fitting for Black, I guess, recently. You slowly build up your board with these very high power characters while healing life and being extremely annoying with your leader effect and your triggers to stall time and make entrance for the 10-cost siege that's going to close out the game one way or another. And so while I do think that some of these cards can be changed depending on the meta, and a lot of these ratios can change of course as well, I think that these are generally going to be the core cards to the strategy of Black Yellow Teach, but we have 8 more cards left to talk about, so let's talk about some of those and talk about some tech cards that I'm choosing not to add, like that 5-cost Porcelino and Burgess like we mentioned at the beginning of this video. From my testing, I've had some random unfortunate scenarios where the opponent hits me for 6k and I just don't have a good 2k, because a lot of times you're playing out your 2ks or actively trashing your 2ks to either search or set up for things like that Shiryu. And so for that reason, I think that this deck feels quite right at about 10 2ks, so I think you may be able to go down to 9. And for that 2k slot, I think that the best one is going to be the 4-cost Baby 5, which on trigger, if your leader is multicolored, draws 2 cards, effectively bringing up your Shiryu triggers, which also draws 2 cards, up to 6. If you're playing in the extra regulation though, which I understand is not going to be happening in the West, I believe, for a little while, if you are, then instead of the Baby 5, I would actually run the 3-cost Kaponebechi, because fuck you. I could talk about this card quite a bit, but because it's not relevant to the standard regulation, I'm going to choose not to. But if you're playing in the extra regulation, I think it's a pretty good card to just tech in, because it's just a random surprise card that basically no one's going to be playing around or realistically can play around. Now, also you may notice that I'm not running Wiper, although I did talk about Wiper in the past, and this is a meta call. Let's first talk about Wiper. Wiper, a 5 cost 6,000 power character, which on play essentially just board wipes anything that's 2,000 power or less, and is also a good way to take back the opponent's board as well, even if they're higher in power, as it reduces all the opponent's characters by minus 2,000 power. This card is very good into a lot of the meta. It's not very good into Black Yamato, who's had a very surprisingly high play rate within this meta. So instead of taking for a matchup like Green Blue Luffy, which I don't see very often, or Purple Enel, which is already favored for this deck, I've chosen to tech for the Black Yamato matchup and put in 4 of San Juan Wolf. This card is going to be one of the more divisive cards in this deck because I think a lot of people are using it incorrectly. I was using it incorrectly for a very long time, and it's why I was a big hater of this card until I've really understood how it's supposed to work. This card, 4 cost 5,000 power character, which on KO draws you 1 card and makes one of your characters or leader 7,000 base power for the duration of the turn, is really, really good as a trigger, but not very good on the board. Now on the board, it's okay. It's basically going to be a 4 cost 5,000 power character, which on KO draws 1 card because the opponent can very easily play around it. But you can redirect one of the opponent's hits into the San Juan Wolf that's on the board. You generally don't really want to because that first attack is going to be the lowest. Usually they're going to hit you for 5,000 power when they may have an 8,000 power character on the board. Because you need to make your leader 7,000 power early on to make it worth it, you waste your leader effect redirecting into the San Juan Wolf to make your leader 7,000 power, which denies some of the smaller attacks, but when those bigger attacks come in, you don't really have many ways of dealing with it because you already use your leader effect. So for that reason, rather than playing this card onto the board as quickly as possible, I try to drop this into my trash and put it into my life with things like the 6 cost Shiryu, or if I haven't seen it yet, that increases my odds of seeing it soon with the 8 cost Teach, and therefore I have lots of different ways to find it. And so because it's a card that I'm playing mostly for the trigger, I'm generally going to want to see it as much as possible, which means that I'm running it at 4 copies. It doesn't really hinder your deck at all because it has 1,000 counter. It's searchable off of all of your searchers while of course having trigger. So it doesn't hurt your deck building, but I think that it has a lot of higher potential when you see it when you need it to. And because you have things like that 6 cost Shiryu, you can see it exactly when you need it to a lot of the time. Still, this is 100% a meta call, so if the Black Yamato Copers start to die down a little bit, I'm going to change this card as quickly as I possibly can. But that brings us to the final card within this deck, another card that I really enjoy, but is really only good into a couple of specific matchups, the 4 cost Shiryu. This 4 cost Shiryu from PRB02 is a 4 cost 5,000 power character, which has plus 4 cost, which with your leader effect has plus 5 cost, and blocker if your leader has the Blackbeard Pirates type, while having the on KO effect of KOing one of the opponent's characters with a base cost of 4 or less. Being able to target base cost is extremely important because it can get rid of things like that 4 cost Reiju, and it can get rid of things like the 4 cost Kiyamon in Black Yamato. 2 cards that can be really annoying to deal with as Black Yellow Teach. This would start to dive into some matchup specific territory, which I don't really want to do within this video because this video is already so long, but essentially this card is very good into some other matchups that can be scary if, for example, the Purple Enel player is really, really good. Because I think that high yellow Purple Enel players make this matchup a lot closer than a lot of people may think it is, and part of that may be because I'm not running the 5 cost Borsalino. Why am I not running the 5 cost Borsalino? Well, it's really fucking expensive. You think it's expensive in the West? I heard it's like $15. Oh, woe is me. It's $50 in Japan. That's not like it feels like $50, but if you use the conversion rate, it's like $30. No, it's actually $50. It feels like $80 in Japan because of the way that the yen works. The cheapest that Borsalino ever was like $28. 8 hours of work at minimum wage in Japan. And I'm like, no, I don't need this card. I don't need this card. And I really don't think that you need this card. In the majority of matchups, being able to play out the 10 cost Teach over and over again is enough. But in some matchups, particularly matchups that you starve, like Purple Enel, like Purple Yellow Roshinante, and things, more obscure things like Purple Single, for example, you do want to have cards to play after you run out of 10 cost Teaches or in the event that you don't find your 10 cost Teaches, and Borsalino is going to be the best option for that. But if you're not planning to fully starve the opponent, or if you're planning to play a more quicker game, by running things like 3 of that 8 cost event that's going to help you close out the game, then I don't think that you need the 5 cost Borsalino because you're not trying to stall time infinitely. You're trying to close out the game before the opponent can find a way back into the game because Black Yellow Teach, though very powerful, does start to run out of resources as the game goes on. Still, the argument of Borsalino makes a lot of sense to me, so I do think that it's a card that you absolutely could put into the deck, and I think that this is what my deck list would look like if I were to add in the 5 cost Borsalino, because it's definitely the card that I'm closest to adding into the deck. But I want to show you, because I went 12-2 over the last couple of days with this Teach deck, that you don't need Borsalino to actually win with this deck. If you don't have the card, don't feel pressured to buy it because, hey, I mean, I'm crushing so many Black Yamatos and a bunch of Purple Enels Like, if I'm winning, do I really need the card? I don't know. I mean, it's a good card, but I've been winning without it, so I'm just going to keep playing the slightly more aggressive way that I like to play, and that's been working for me. And I think that that's important. Understand the way that you like to play the game and play more towards that. If you're a bit of a turtle player, then turtle a bit more and put in things like the 5-cost Borsellino. If you like to play a little bit more aggressively, put in things like that 8-cost event and take the fight to the opponent. There's lots of different ways that you can change the way that you play this deck with just a couple of small changes. So make sure to kind of understand how you want to play out this game and play towards that. Still, because I have been testing without 5-cost Borsellino for so long and I've gotten used to not having it and being able to close out the game at a reasonable pace, especially because in Japan we have double loss the second that you go to 30 minutes, I've been able to win and been very successful with this version of Teach. But while I can understand why you'd run things like the 5-cost Borsellino, I cannot understand why you'd run things like the 9-cost Hancock or the 4-cost Burgess. 9-cost Hancock is very good on one specific turn, the 9-dong turn when you're going first. It basically just peels one of the opponent's life and heals you one while playing a big character, very similar to if you were to play the 8-cost Zihahaha into the 10-cost Teach, but it comes out a little bit earlier. But as we mentioned, in a lot of these matchups, you're not actually trying to be the one that finishes out the game, though there are a couple of matchups where you do want to do that. But rather what you're trying to do in most matchups is stall out the game for as long as possible for your 10-cost Teach to actually be the one that closes out the game rather than the 9-cost Hancock. And giving the opponent free cards to help defend their board is going to actually hinder you in some of these matchups that you're trying to starve. And the 4-cost Burgess, don't get me started on this because I think every single list in Japan, and I'm even seeing in the West as well recently, has been running this card, but I really don't understand it. It's okay into Yamato, but San Juan Wolf is better. People are not maxing out San Juan Wolf and complaining that they can't beat Yamato. But really, I think that Burgess is just a win more card. If you can play down this card on 4-dong or 5-dong, or if you can play it in tandem with Borsellino on 9-dong, it feels good, but it doesn't necessarily win you the game on its own. On that 9-dong turn, you generally prefer to play out things like that 8-cost Teach. They're very equivalent in the amount of resources and value that you get out of that exchange. And on the 4 and 5-dong turn, playing out this character, especially if you don't have things like My Era in circulation, it's going to take you a very long time to actually get that Burgess up to a meaningful power threshold. Still, I could actually make an entire video on why I think that Burgess is wrong within this deck, but this video is so long that I just wanted to basically say, I think it's a win more card, and so that's why this is my completed list for Teach currently. This will change as the meta evolves, as people understand how to play against Teach a bit more or play and tech for different decks within the meta. But right now, because there's a lot of decks that are out there that are trying to beat Teach, whether it's Green Blue Luffy or Black Yamato, this is a list that I've had the most success with and one that I wanted to share with you guys. I understand that it's taken me a little while to present this list because I have been cooking it up and I did want to keep it a little bit secret. But regardless, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Maybe try it out. I'm also going to put the code for the deck list in the description below if you want to try it on the optcg sim. Make sure to let me know how this deck treats you because I've been having so much fun with it. I started with losing about 6 games in a row, and I mean, now I have a close to 80% win rate on the sim. I don't know my physical stats, so I've played a couple hundred games physically. But I win more than I lose for sure, and I'm 12-2 in actual important tournaments with physical cards. So I absolutely love this deck, and if you're interested in Black Yellow Teach, I hope that I was able to give you some of my opinions on these cards to help you understand how to deck build as well. Thank you very much for watching this video, and of course make sure to check out SleeveChief, code Kai5 for the best TCG supplies. Hope you guys had a nice pre-release, and I'll see you guys in the next video, one that's going to be a lot more high effort because I've been working on it for a couple of weeks now. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.